Hi, folks. Rick Edwards here. Thank you for being back with us today. We're going to be looking at a passage from 1 Samuel chapter 4 today. This lesson is actually one of four lessons that represent a period of time either during the period of the Judges, which would have been the book of Ruth, or toward the very end of the period of the Judges. The period of the Judges was a period of about 400 years between the time when the Israelites conquered and settled into the Canaan land, but they did not displace the people, all of them, as they were supposed to. But they settled the land. Then they went through this 400-year period where there was this cycle of falling prey to the gods of their neighbors, people that they were supposed to displace. They would sin, they would be oppressed, they would repent, they would experience deliverance. So they kept going through this cycle: sin, oppression, repentance, deliverance. And they went through the cycle over and over and over. And if you go back to Judges chapter 2, you can read there about this cycle and about the fact that this cycle wasn't just a cycle that happened over and over again like this. This, according to Judges 2, the cycle was like this. They would sin and they'd go through the cycle. And then the next time it would get worse. It would get worse. It would get worse. And it kept getting worse and worse and worse throughout the book of Judges. And now you come down to 1 Samuel chapter 4, and what we're going to discover here in this chapter, that things have gotten as bad as they can possibly get for Israel. And that's really part of the point of 1 Samuel chapter 4. Now I want to pose a question to you that I think might be good for you to start your class with. And the question is this: why don't we lose our faith, or why don't we feel our faith is challenged when bad things happen to other people? I think most of us tend to feel our faith is intact. Everything's, I believe in God. I know what I believe. Yes, God is good. As long as things are going good for us, we look around. Yeah, we know bad things happen to other people, but we don't allow our faith to be challenged. Our faith isn't lost, so to speak, when bad things happen to other people. But just let bad things happen to us, and suddenly we're asking the question, where is God? Why is God letting these things happen to me? I don't understand why God isn't present in my challenges, in my struggles, in my troubles. So it's a good question to ask, and I think today's lesson helps address this question. Why don't we lose faith when bad things happen to other people? Why is it only when bad things happen to us that we feel our faith is being challenged? Okay, well, let's talk about the context of this story and what's happening here. So it's happening toward chapter 4. It's taking place at the end of the period of the Judges. In 1 Samuel chapter 8, just 4 chapters later, the people are going to come to Samuel and say, we want a king. And while Samuel doesn't like the idea, God is not happy with the idea. God says to Samuel, go ahead, let them have a king. So 1 Samuel is really going to be, as a book, is going to be about the establishment of the monarchy. But before we get there, these early chapters, 1 Samuel 1 through 7, are a transition period that are preparing the people for the king or the kingdom, the monarchy that's going to be coming. Okay? And this chapter, chapter 4, shows us some dire, awful circumstances and tragedies that befall the people of God, people of Israel, as they're going through another one of these cycles downward. They find themselves feeling as though things can't possibly get worse, and that really was true. Chapter 4 represents probably the lowest point in all of Israel's history. It's really terrible, the biblical history. So let's take a look at this chapter and see what happens. Now, the core verses are verses 2 through 11, but we really need to take a look at the whole chapter, because this chapter 4 is a unit, and you need to understand the whole chapter to get a grasp on what the biblical writer is trying to say here. So you can follow along there, because your quarterly and the core passage addresses the early events or circumstances of chapter 4. So what happens? The Israelites go out to do battle with the Philistines, and they get beaten pretty badly. So they come back and they're going, what happened? Why did we get beaten? And someone comes up with a bright idea. Hey, let's go get the Ark of the Covenant from the tabernacle in Shiloh. We'll take the Ark of the Covenant into battle with us against the Philistines, and surely God will be with us. God will deliver the Philistines into our hands. So sure enough, they send some guys, run off to Shiloh. They get the Ark of the Covenant. Now remember, the Ark of the Covenant was basically a box that represented the presence of God among the people. So they go get this box, this Ark of the Covenant. There in Shiloh, you have 3 priests. Eli, who is the high priest, the oldest, and his 2 sons, Eli and Phinehas. And Eli and Phinehas are not good people. They're priests, but they're not good priests. They're taking advantage of the people. They're just a couple of scoundrels. But they're there. Eli is way too old. He can't go into battle. But Eli and Phinehas think, this is a great idea. Let's go with the ark. So they go back with the ark. The Israelites take the ark into battle against the Philistines, thinking, all right, God is going to deliver us because we have his box. Okay? Well, again, the Philistines beat them really, really bad. And that's not all. So the Israelites, this is all chapter 4. The Israelites get defeated by the Philistines once. They get defeated by the Philistines twice. And in that battle, Hophni and Phinehas, who were the successors to be the next judge or judges in Israel, they are both killed in the battle. So now it's as though the future has been killed. Hophni and Phinehas are dead. But it gets worse. Not only do they lose to the Philistines twice, not only do Hophni and Phinehas get killed in the battle, but the Ark of the Covenant itself, the ark where God supposedly lived, the ark that represented the presence of God, gets captured by the Philistines and taken away by the Philistines. Now you have to understand, in their mind, that was like the worst possible thing because that box represented the presence of God. So when the Philistines captured the box, the Ark of the Covenant, it was as though they were capturing God himself. God has been taken captive by the Philistines, and now he's been carried away into the Philistine towns. How could anything be worse? Our God, not only has he been defeated, he's been captured. So, terrible thing. This is all chapter 4. A runner goes from the battle back to Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas had just come from, and where Eli still was. He goes back and he tells them, this is what's happened. It's been a terrible day. We've lost the Ark of the Covenant. When he tells Eli, who is now like 98 years old, when he tells Eli, he is so distraught and overcome by this news, Eli falls, breaks his neck, and dies. Still chapter 4. He dies. So now, defeated in battle twice, Hophni and Phinehas both killed, successors to the judgeship. The Ark of the Covenant has been lost, taken back to the Philistine camp by the Philistines, and their judge, their current judge and high priest, Eli, is dead. Wow, this is terrible. Well, it would be easy to end the chapter there, but that is not the end of the chapter. There's one more little story that's very, very important. So, Phinehas' wife, who's back at Shiloh, when she gets the news, it turns out that she's pregnant. She's close to delivering. When she gets the news of what's happened, her husband is dead, Eli is dead, and the Ark of the Covenant has been stolen, the Israelites were defeated, it's such a traumatic event for her that she goes into labor and begins to give birth to the child. But it's not just a normal delivery. It's not a normal birth. She's so overcome with the grief and the trauma of the situation that this childbirth is actually going to kill her. She is about to die. So chapter 4 ends with Phinehas' wife giving birth, and in the process, she's going to die. But as she's giving birth, they tell her, hey, you've given birth to a son. Isn't that good news? She's still so overcome with all the bad news that she's received that day. She says, this is the worst day ever. They say, what do you want to name your baby son? His name is going to be Ichabod. Now, you may be familiar with Ichabod from literature of other places, but in this case, Ichabod is the name that she gives to her son, and it means no glory, or the glory has departed. And she explains, I'm calling him Ichabod because the glory of Israel in their God, represented by the Ark of the Covenant, has been taken away. We've lost our glory. She's lost her husband, she's lost her father-in-law, and now she's given birth to a son, but she's so distraught, so despondent over all the things that's happened, she names her son Ichabod. And the chapter ends on this very, very sad, dark note, and it's supposed to. The writer wants us to see, wants us to understand, wants us to read this chapter and come to the conclusion that Israel has now reached the lowest possible point. It can't get any worse than this. And that was pretty true. Now, this chapter is setting up what's going to happen in chapters 5, 6, and 7. And just because we're not going to actually be studying chapters 5 and 6, let me just give you a little preview. They take the Ark of the Covenant back to the Philistine towns, and there God demonstrates that he doesn't need an army, he doesn't need a king, he doesn't need a judge, he doesn't need anything. God is perfectly capable of taking care of himself. And the Philistines soon discover they have messed with the wrong God, because everything begins to go wrong, and you get to chapter 6 of 1 Samuel, and they're sending back the ark. We don't want it. Please take your God home. And that's what happens in chapter 6. Okay? Now we'll talk about chapter 7 next week, but just understand these chapters are really crucial because they're preparing things for the coming king, the kingdom that's about to be established. But now in chapter 4, what we're discovering is that, wow, this is a low point. Things can't possibly get worse. All that downward spiraling that has been happening throughout the period of the judges has finally hit this point. It's as bad as it can possibly get. So what are some lessons that we can draw from this? Some things that you might want to point out to your class as you look at this chapter. First of all, I would say, this is what happens to the people of Israel when they forsake their God. And that's true. They just kept forsaking God. They'd come back periodically. They'd come back temporarily, but things just kept getting worse and worse and worse until you get down to 1 Samuel chapter 4. And here, it's just as bad as it can get. It can't get any worse than this. And that's because they have forsaken their God. It's a terrible, terrible time. Another lesson I would point out is that God does not live in a box or the Ark of the Covenant any more than God lives in a building. Now, sometimes we refer to our church buildings as the house of God, and that's okay. We get it. As long as we understand, we may call it that. But God no more lives in a building with our church name on it than he lived in a box in 1 Samuel chapter 4. So we always need to remember, God doesn't live in a box. Another important lesson is that God will not be manipulated. God will not be controlled. God will not be used for our purposes. They just thought, well, let's just get the Ark of the Covenant, take it into battle. God will be on our side because we've pushed all the right buttons. We've done all the right things. We've got his box. Therefore, God will be with us. No. God made it very clear. Just because you think you can control me, I'm going to demonstrate you do not manipulate God. You do not control God. Very important lesson from this chapter. Another thing we need to understand is that our hope is never to be in a box. Now, I think the Israelites understood that even though the Ark of the Covenant represented God's presence, they knew that God didn't actually live in that box. They knew that. And we know that God doesn't actually live in a building. But sometimes, folks, we fall into the same mistake. We want to think that somehow God lives in a box. If we can control the box, we can control God. No, our hope is not in a box. Our hope is not in a building. We do not trust in these outward trappings in the things of God outwardly. We trust in God himself, and there's a very big difference. Okay? Now, final lesson, and this takes us back to the question that I posed at the beginning. Why do we not lose faith when bad things happen to other people? Well, we kind of all get it. We understand, well, that's them. I've got my own things going on over here. As long as my life is good, then God must be good. Everything's good. God's been good to me. I'm going to love him and honor him, and I'm going to believe in him. But we need to understand, and this chapter helps us understand, that our faith is not to be built on the circumstances surrounding us. Our faith is not shaped or defined by our circumstances. Rather, our faith needs to be based on the power and the character of God himself, because the circumstances change. You may think things are going great today, and you may get terrible news tomorrow. Something awful may happen to you tomorrow. But the character, the power of God never changes. And that's what God wanted these people to understand, is that you're not trusting in a box. You're not looking at the circumstances. Don't let the circumstances define God. And that's what they were doing. This poor woman, this poor mother at the end gives birth, and she's despondent because she thinks the circumstances have overcome their God. She thinks the circumstances have defeated their God, and she's despondent and sad, and ultimately dies in the context of this despondency and sadness because she thinks the circumstances have defined God, when in fact it's God who defines the circumstances. And when you go on to chapter 5, you discover that God is not going to be held captive by the Philistines. They take him into the temple of Dagon. The next day, Dagon has fallen over. They put him back up. The next day, he's fallen over. He's lost his head. He's lost his hands. Pretty soon, the people of the Philistines are saying, we can't handle this. Send the Ark of the Covenant back. They discovered they were messing with the wrong God. So things begin to change from chapter 4 to chapter 5 because God is still God. No matter how bad the circumstances get, God is still God. God is still going to pursue his purposes and accomplish his purposes in spite of the circumstances. So we need to let our faith be based not upon the circumstances, no matter how good or bad they may be. Our faith needs to be based upon the power and the character of God. And that's 1 Samuel chapter 4. Thanks for listening.